Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Leaders Show, where we talk key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing DOGE, Grok, and our future coexistence with AI, plus headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. We're live every Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube. The audio recording is available the following week, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to our sponsor, Oracle NetSuite. Their cloud ERP helps provide real-time visibility into operational and financial performance. Podcast followers can get preferred pricing of 45% off. Go to irpaai.com/netsuite for more information. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up IRPA AI. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. I'm joined today by Chris Surdak. He's a senior analyst at IRPA AI, former White House Chief Transformation Office Advisor, partner for digital transformation at Gartner, and AI practice lead at EY. Chris, good afternoon.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. Have you gotten audited by Grok yet?
No, I've managed to avoid so far. We'll see. I have a district court judge that's making sure that he doesn't get anything done.
Okay, all right. Maybe after today's show, we might both be on the DOGE list. Let's see. At least I think I'm going to be. We'll see what happens. But before we get to that, headlines for this week. The big one was Google acquiring Wiz for $32 billion with a B. Bloomberg and Forbes are saying it's their renewed urgency to catch up in the cloud computing race. They've been losing to Microsoft Azure and AWS. They actually were supposed to acquire them a few years back and kind of stopped due to the regulatory pressure.
Well, which leads you to wonder, okay, if it was monopoly power to acquire them a few years ago, why is it not monopoly power to acquire them today?
New administration.
Well, yeah. So, the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We're certainly there. I don't know that I think it's really great to make Google even more powerful, but, we'll see what happens with it. It is fascinating that was about 12 years ago, no one in the corporate world was going to adopt cloud stuff. And then I think it was JP Morgan finally signed up and said, we're going to do cloud. Now everybody does cloud. It's interesting to see how quickly things change like that.
Yeah, I remember sitting, we used to do these road shows, right, back in the Outsourcing Institute days. And, we'd go to, a bunch of major cities twice a year, spring and fall usually. And I remember sitting in San Francisco at one of those events, hearing a banking executive say they would never be in the cloud. And then it seemed like maybe a year later, maybe it was a few years later, but sitting in the same conference room, in the same law office, looking out the window as they erected the new Salesforce tower, thinking they said it would never happen. Right?
Yeah, well, or work from home, right? And then COVID hits, and then the entire workforce is working from home. It's funny how those sorts of dogmas that no one ever is going to move away from, we can leave them instantly once we decide to do so.
Interesting you mentioned work from home. The remote work thing apparently is way down. I hadn't seen this. I think a lot of the people we interact with still work from home or just on the road or whatever. But some recent data coming out saying that remote work dropped 26% last month. And although hybrid work is up a bit, it's far from eclipsing the on-site numbers. So just 16% of the U.S. workforce is working hybrid, and more than half now are back to the office. I thought that was I knew it was kind of trending that way, but I was surprised at those numbers.
Yeah, substantial numbers for sure, and I think hybrid is probably more likely. It's past the point of being acceptable. But I think there's also the argument that people are simply more productive when they do go into the office, and I think there's arguments for that. But yeah, some roles always were sort of hybrid, or you could work from home, and others you really need to be there. So it's going to be interesting to see how many people are willing to go back to that after they've experienced the work from home thing, because you save hours a day, and I think a lot of the research shows that people are generally more productive when they do work from home, on average anyway.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He's an entrepreneur. I'm working with him on some go-to-market strategy and things. And he's in Europe, but he has a very interesting. It reminded me of kind of like a couple different things coming together, like good management, time management, techniques, as well as kind of the work from home thing. And what he does is he spends Monday working from home, kind of preparing for his week. He's in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, having meetings, collaborating with his team and those sorts of things. And then Friday, he's back at home again. So he's got that flexibility, some personal stuff, wrap up the week kind of thing, more focused time. I thought it was a really interesting kind of blend that I think, depending on the job that you're in, interesting.
I have a couple of colleagues that do the same thing. They do a Monday or Friday stay at home, which kind of extends the weekend, but they're just as busy. They're still doing meetings and so forth. I think you can't discount the value of a lot of in-person time, at least with certain roles. And I think, that bears out. But by the same token, giving people that flexibility generally gives them greater job satisfaction. So I think the other thing that's going to play a role in this is adoption of AI and the degree to which parts of your job can be automated away. I think that we're vastly overestimating how much of that's going to be the case, but the degree to which you can automate removes some of the need for that in-person time potentially, or further emphasizes the need for in-person time, depending upon how AI impacts your job.
Yeah. NVIDIA had some announcements this week. They had their GTC conference recently. A couple big announcements. NVIDIA, obviously often the bellwether of the AI industry. So they announced they're debuting a new AI chip dubbed Blackwell Ultra. It's going to be available second half of this year. They also announced a new AI graphics processing chip for 2026. And some new partnerships, autonomous vehicle partnership with GM, telecom partnership with Cisco to develop 6G network, and drive-thrus, a partnership with fast food giant Yum Brands to bring AI assisted ordering to its restaurants. So you know what, you can actually be working, Chris, from a Taco Bell in a few months. You're just doing market research.
NVIDIA is the absolute pinnacle of the idea of, in a gold rush, make shovels, don't dig for gold, right? And they're making a fortune off of doing that. Do I really want AI to be making my pizza? I potentially, but what I find amazing is that these are the best use cases that people can come up with, right? Taco Bell's gonna do a better job of ordering than if you just called it in. Seems kind of underwhelming for $1 trillion of investment, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, but you talk about some of these workforce changes, right? I mean, my observation living in the suburbs of Long Island is I don't know if I've become less patient and more cranky as I'm getting older. That's certainly what my wife would say, but the quality of the average customer experience in any of these retail or restaurant spaces has gone down significantly in recent years. So I'm very I don't know if I want the AI to build my pizza yet, although there's some really interesting robots on cruise ships now that make cocktails. But I think I'd be very, very happy with an AI taking my order and not screwing it up.
Well, and given that I live in California, and I forget, I think we've bumped up the minimum wage to like $20 for food service. So if on the rare occasion that I ever go into like a fast food restaurant or something, there's 2 workers. That's it. And you're waiting for, it's no longer fast food because they simply don't have any staff. The degree to which AI and robots can potentially alleviate that a little bit is arguably good. But that also means you're going to have a lot of people that are unemployed or underemployed. So all technologies bring both good and bad with them. And I think, we're going to have to absorb some of the negative implications of these technologies as we roll them out. It may not be necessarily a social good. We'll see.
So the other big tech industry news was Apple getting some heat on Siri AI being delayed. It was supposed to be out, and apparently, according to some internal memos obtained by Bloomberg, the Siri team is burnt out and embarrassed. It was supposed to be out and be a selling point for iPhone 16, and now there's no clear launch timeline, with some insiders saying they may not even be out until the summer.
Which is fascinating, that to find Apple falling behind in something like this, because we always think of Apple as the most innovative company out there. But I'm an Apple user, and I haven't used Siri since it came out. So I know some people do, but is it really that much of a miss if it's not there? I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, but it is telling that they're having difficulty implementing something that is useful and value added in this particular space. I've seen a bunch of the memos and notes between the Apple people, and they're saying, look, this stuff just doesn't work. So in some ways, I find that they might be the most reasonable and rational people in the tech industry, because they're like, this stuff doesn't work, or it doesn't work well enough and accurate enough to be a worthwhile addition to what our products and services. So, it'll be interesting to see how they respond. I think they were also talking with OpenAI about just buying and using OpenAI as part of their underlying infrastructure. I'm not completely convinced that that's a good move either, based upon the kind of responses I get out of ChatGPT still, but we'll see.
I'd like it just to know when I'm talking to it. Like, as I'm talking to you now, I usually do a good job of muting my my Alexas and my phones and stuff, so when we talk on the show, they don't come up. But she completely interrupted my little spiel there for a minute. I couldn't even hear you. And it's interesting, right? Because it came up on my Mac, and I almost forgot she's there. I don't know about you. I don't use it on my Mac at all. I mean, I go out of my way to talk to Alexa. I have a Google phone. Download a ChatGPT, and here she is, like, trying to interrupt my day, and I'm not even using her. So definitely potential there, but you're right. Maybe there's a surprise ahead on some responsible AI coming out from Apple, hopefully.
There's a lot of discussion about how after you never know when these generative AI tools are lying to you, or they simply don't know what they're saying. And I've had a lot of debates online with other people where they're making the same acknowledgement that it answers you with the same degree of confidence whether it knows the right answer or not. And so you never know when you can or cannot trust it. And I think that might be part of what they're struggling with is how many times do you need to get a wrong response, and then you find out after the fact that it's wrong before it's no longer an acceptable user experience? And Apple's a very user experience kind of company, so I suspect that that's partially what they're struggling with. The fact that the system is, these AIs are totally confident in their response, even when they're wrong, and you as a user don't know. So if you say, "Hey Siri, help me order from Taco Bell," and their new AI agent, they could be picking the wrong Taco Bell, or they could be placing the order with McDonald's, and you wouldn't know the difference until you find out that the order's wrong. So yeah. I think that user experience sort of stuff is what they're probably struggling with.
Chris, before we jump into the main topic, how you feeling about the economy? I mean, I try not to be like too reactionary on headlines, but another retailer bit the dust this week. Forever 21 is shutting down. Morgan Stanley announced 2,000 job cuts today. Johns Hopkins last week, another 2,000 jobs over there. And listen, your robot vacuum might stop working. The Roomba company that built iRobot is saying they'll be closing by the end of the year if they don't get a buyer. Amazon was supposed to buy them back in 2022, but the deal collapsed also because of regulatory pressure. So maybe Amazon will rethink that. But in the meantime, I don't know. Those vacuums going to work when they go down? How does that work?
What are the cats going to do? I always see the videos like on YouTube of the Roombas chasing cats around the house. Yeah, I've felt for quite a while that the economy is far worse than we are kind of acknowledging. We're sort of whistling past the graveyard a little bit. I've also seen some reports where there's significant concerns in the housing market, and a lot of the key metrics in the housing market are far worse than they were in 2007. And then commercial real estate, billions and billions and billions of dollars of commercial real estate bonds come due this year. And the question is are enough people going back to work that that commercial real estate's going to stay propped up? We're in tough times. And then what's interesting is if we've been on sort of the hairy edge of the economy for several years now, love him or hate him, Trump coming in and kind of taking a ball peen hammer to the whole thing, but with the threats of tariffs and so forth, that might be enough of a forcing function to kind of tip us off of this balancing point we've been on and really drive some significant disruption through the economy. I think you're going to see it, but there too, someone like a Forever 21. When was the last time you walked around in a mall?
I went back. I went back.
Yeah.
I had a birthday party for my son in an arcade. Remember those? It's like a retro arcade that's in the mall. And he loved it. But we told him, okay, you can walk around and pick a toy, from one of these stores. And I realized my kids have never been to the mall. I mean, they were there when they were kids, like to see Santa or whatever, but they don't remember it. They're like literally walking around. I mean, I felt like I was 100 years old. They're walking around the mall, like looking around like it's space. Like, what is this place?
So this is a mall. I think the last time I was in a mall was probably just before Christmas. The last time I bought something on Amazon was yesterday. So
while we're sitting here, last time I bought something on Amazon was while I was on the
exactly.
podcast.
I think I read that something like 60% of the Fortune 500 companies are zombie companies, in that they their cash flow is less than their credit, or something to that effect. Basically, the only thing that's kept them afloat for the last decade is effectively free money, because interest rates were so low. And so now that interest rates aren't so low, it's inevitable that these companies are going to go away. So I think they've been suffering a slow death for the better part of a decade anyway. And so sort of letting them bleed out to a certain extent now is probably the most humane thing to do with them. But I think those are structural changes that we're never going back to. Those are jobs that are disappearing and they're never going to come back. And the further centralization that you see in someone like an Amazon is sort of the inevitable result. They're better. It's a better experience. They're cheaper, et cetera. But there's going to be some fallout from their domination of consumer of the consumer market.
So, speaking of a skeleton company, let's go to the U.S. government and start with DOGE. I mean, it's difficult, and you and I are industry watchers, right? We do this every day. It's difficult to keep track of everything that's going on at a breakneck pace. The innovator in me, the tech evangelist in me thinks, hey, this is kind of exciting because we're here's a guy, Elon Musk, who, regardless of how you feel about him, you can't argue with his success, right? From a business standpoint, at least, right? I mean, I've been watching those poor astronauts that got stuck in space for 9 months. They were supposed to be up there for a week. They were up there for 9 months. A Boeing aircraft had an issue that brought them up there. I mean, but there's nothing more American than Boeing, right? And now you have Elon's Starlink. You have SpaceX, Tesla. So you can't argue with the success. So part of me is like, let's have a non-government business disruptor disrupt and change things. I don't think anybody would argue against some reasonable audit and search for waste within the U.S. government. But I mean, this is going on at a crazy pace, and really with not a whole lot of transparency.
I think the pace is the only way it can possibly work, because the level of inertia involved in the government, which by the way is a function of the government, right? We purposely want the bureaucracy to slow things down, because in society we need a degree of stability and reliability in how things function. So as much as we all hate the bureaucracy, there is some value to it. But I think the only way that you could actually get change to take place is you had to run so fast that people couldn't keep up. The other thing I find interesting is everyone's kind of having a meltdown that this businessman, Elon Musk, is kind of stepping in and doing all this governmental stuff. There's nothing new about that. I mean, Robert McNamara under Kennedy, he was brought in from Ford to restructure the entire Department of Defense back in the 1960s. And I forget the name of the guy, but there was a similar auto manufacturing guy brought in under FDR in World War II to manage the industrialization of our war effort in World War II. So this isn't new, using business people to do this kind of stuff. I think what is sort of difficult with Elon is, I mean, he's so clearly autistic. He's so clear. I think he may even self-claims to have a degree of Asperger's. So he does stuff without a degree of kind of social grace, right? So he's ripping all this stuff down, and he's kind of pointing out things that are uncomfortable truths, but he's not painting it in a nice light. And I think that's what's probably driving most people crazy. I think few of us could argue that getting efficiency out of the government is a bad thing. It's not the message, it's how he's saying it that I think people are uncomfortable with. But hey, I also saw, I think earlier today, that Twitter now has a valuation of $44 billion. So all the talk back in the day of him buying it and he way overpaid for it and Twitter's going to fail and it's going to go bankrupt and no one's going to use it. He wipes out 80% of the workforce, and it's a much better platform now than it ever was, arguably. But it also is now worth more. So you can hate the message, or you can hate the messenger, but the message is still pretty valid, I think.
So I think a couple things. You bring up a great point. I remember even back in the days of not to get political on you, but back in the days of Obamacare, there was so much misinformation. Again, regardless of how you felt about it, there was so much misinformation out there. And I remember thinking to myself, what they should have hired is a marketing team to really talk about what it was, what it wasn't, and fix some of those things. So I think you bring up a good point with the communication side of things. I think there's a couple concerns. I spent most of the morning trying to read both sides of this. One of the top concerns, I think, is, normally when you come from a, finance background, big corporate background, usually when you audit something, you spend a bunch of time on it, right? You kind of figure out where the issues are. You review those issues, and then you decide on how to deal with those issues, right? So, like I said, the quickness of this, Wired actually had an article where they interviewed 150 inspectors general that were let go as part of the federal cuts, and they were basically saying that some of these DOGE people that came in, made decisions in a couple of weeks that there's no way. Like, you take the Social Security system, for example. They said it's such a complicated system. There's no way anybody could come in to the Social Security system and understand it well enough to make major changes within 2 weeks. A typical investigation by these inspectors general would take somewhere between 6 months and a year and a half. Even if you say, hey, year and a half is way too long, there's a big difference between 6 months and 2 weeks, right? To get to know the systems and processes that you're trying to change.
Yes, but I think I saw earlier today where the Social Security system lists, was it 15 million people over the age of 120? I'd like to meet them. That's pretty impressive. And so the idea is, well, we're going to destroy Social Security. I think it's worse that we have 15 million supposed people getting paid benefits when they're over 120 years old. So, I mean, I think the lights being flicked on and the cockroaches all running out of the kitchen, When you have those sorts of egregious examples of fraud or abuse or whatever, that's the part that's kind of sticking out to people as being excessive. And I think those are the ones where clearly the answer is shut that stuff down to the benefit of all. It's just painful, and people don't like this degree of change and this degree of shining the light on something that's clearly wrong or clearly defective in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, anytime you interview a sample of people that have been fired, you know, there's going to be a slant to that. And my guess, and I don't know for sure, my guess is that Wired did not interview people that were not fired, because then they may have gotten fired. So I don't know, maybe they did, but you bring up an interesting debate point, I think, on the Social Security. So, you know, yes to everything you said. However, some of the people that are critiquing this are saying that proves the point that these guys don't know the system. That, you know, even though there were, those people found these issues, they weren't really issues. It was a quick search that they did. Those people weren't actually getting paychecks. It was the fact that they didn't understand how to use the system that caused some of these numbers to pop up at, I think Trump mentioned in the State of the Union or the address to Congress, that, you know, yes, they were in there, but they weren't receiving checks, and that's an indication that they don't understand the system. So I don't know.
Yeah, again, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So even opening the conversation about why are there people, 15 million people over 120 years old, even in the database, whether or not they're getting checks or whether or not the payments are going out, I think that's a reasonable conversation to be had. And for people who had that responsibility to make sure that kind of fraud wasn't taking place, to be complaining about it, I'm not. You know, it makes you wonder,
not worried.
What were these inspector generals doing for the last 20 years that they were working there?
You're not worried about it. You know, then I saw this other thing that, you know, was talking about some of the numbers, right? You do some math on the numbers, and they're like, well, you know, again, nobody's against going after waste, but you know, you're talking about, you know, a couple $100 billion of abuse, which sounds like a big number, but in a $7 trillion budget, it's actually a relatively small number. It's like 3% of the federal budget. And then what's the cost of canceling some of these government contracts? So you and I have both been privy to some of these, you know, outsourced vendors, government contractors, the types of things that they do, and what happens when you cancel those contracts ahead of the date, right? Sometimes you have to pay, you know, 10-15% of the contract anyway. And then, you know, what about the bulk discounting maybe that you're getting? So yeah, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. Maybe there is I'm sure there's a lot of junk in there, but, you know, have they really been able to do the analysis to say, hey, you know, it feels good to knock those people out, kill those contracts, but it's like the guy, you know, on my hockey team that I follow, who doesn't play, but they still pay his contract for the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's you really have to do the full lifetime, like the lifetime value of that revenue stream, to see if it's worthwhile cutting it off short. But there's also downstream effects. I have a really good friend in the DC area, and she and all of her colleagues are, you know, the entire DC area is basically funded by the federal government. They all make their money this way. And there's a localized economic collapse there. People are freaked out. I think, you know, the housing market in Northern Virginia is collapsing because people are like, you know, we're all losing our jobs. We're going to lose our homes. So those knock-on effects are going to be pretty substantial. That may not necessarily be a bad thing, given that I think like the 15 counties around Washington, D.C. is the highest concentration of wealth in the entire world at this point, which is not a good thing, right? Because those people are being paid off of the backs of all the rest of the nation, and all of us as taxpayers. But you know, you pull a dollar out of these sorts of businesses that have been dependent upon the government paying them for decades. There's a multiplying effect in the negative sense against all those companies. So taking a wrecking ball to it is not necessarily the smartest thing to do, because it's hard to see what those unintended consequences of cutting off that funding is going to be. But one thing we know for sure, it's going to be painful to a substantial number of people, I think.
So that's kind of one kind of argument I heard around, the thing. The other, though, which is actually kind of an interesting one, is, if you get into a little bit into the politics of it, the Trump administration, promised all these economic turnarounds and fix unemployment. Meanwhile, the government is the biggest leader of unemployment right now. So, there's a 245% layoff numbers from U.S. employers last month in February, and the federal government was the leading source. 62,000 federal workers were dismissed during the first 2 months of the year. So that kind of counter to what they said they were going to do. How are these people going to get jobs? Where are they going to work?
Well, and I mean, kind of think it over. If you were a federal worker for the last 10, 15, 20 years and you got laid off, it's kind of rough to get into the commercial workplace and compete based upon that sort of messaging. I don't envy any of those people as they try to get back into the job market. And typically those sort of federal workers, when they go to the private sector, they're going to hook up with some kind of vendor that feeds the government, some company that does government related work. And that's where the cuts are hitting as well. So I think a lot of them are going to have a really rough time getting reemployed based upon, sort of the narrative of their prior work history.
Yeah. So, and I guess the last, this is a 5-hour discussion, but if I had to, simplify it into a couple bullet points or debate points, I think the other, which gets into the other part of our discussion, is, the other concern about what's going on is the fact that, okay, the guy leading this also owns X and has his own AI, a large language model in Grok. So definitely some concerns about, by the way, Grok is, I don't know your sense. My sense, Chris, is it's kind of known for its advanced reasoning, real-time ability to leverage real-time data and kind of think and problem solve better than, according to some benchmarks, do better research than some of the other large language models that are out there. And so you take something like that, which we've talked about, these models and the privacy concerns in general, and now you unleash it on American citizens, right? So you have certainly this data privacy issue on steroids now of going to use AI and large language models, on sensitive citizen data, on immigration, on some of these other issues, right? And then there's just sort of this surveillance concern, which is, on again, off again, always a concern, right? But, is it going to allow, this administration or the next administration, whatever administration, to increase essentially surveillance on citizens?
The brief time I was working with the White House was specifically on a platform like that. And so I'm particularly sensitive to the surveillance that's going on and the notion that we will use any of these technologies, but AI in particular, not only to do the surveillance, but then to make decisions based upon that. That was the part that I found really upsetting, quite honestly. I don't think that it's a good idea for us to go there, but I don't know if we can stop ourselves. What I find interesting with Grok is actually really good, but it's not the platform that everyone talks about. Everyone talks about Gemini from Google or OpenAI, or they talk about Claude. You don't hear a lot of noise about Grok, but it actually is a pretty solid platform. It's getting into all of the data that the government has is both a huge gold mine of opportunity and an enormous risk for all of us. And I think that's where having a degree of oversight of what's happening is critical. The problem is, and you and I have discussed this at length, as it's currently built, AI is not governable. You cannot control this technology. And to think so is just an illusion. That doesn't mean we shouldn't invest heavily in AI governance. It just means it's not going to be very effective. So I think we have to embrace this technology, but we need to do so with a degree of caution that I don't see people applying to it.
Yeah, yeah, and I've always been. I've always been somewhat controversial in family circles and friend circles with, okay, I give some data to a company and they monetize that data. But they're in the business of making money. And so they may not always do the right thing by me, but generally speaking, they're going to do what makes them money. And in a capitalist society, you'd hope that, if they're doing things that are not good for society, then people stop using them or boycott them or protest them and, sell their shares. Right. So there's some, we all know it's not that simple and perfect, but you hope that there's some kind of check and balance there of, okay, well, if Google starts trying to take over the world, then, people will, push back. But now that there's this potential of the government having access to, what made me feel really good and really bad at the same time is when COVID happened and the government decided they were going to send out those stimulus checks. Remember, people forget this. They sent out the same stimulus check to every citizen in the United States, regardless of how much money they made. And that wasn't because they decided that was the best way to do it. It's because they couldn't figure out who made what. And I'm thinking to myself, you have an IRS that in theory should have access to that information, right? So you should be able to pretty easily say, Chris is in this bucket, so he gets this much. Dan's in this bucket, so he gets that much. They couldn't even do that. So the idea of government surveillance and things didn't really concern me that much, because it doesn't bother me that Google knows what I like to search on the web, as long as the government doesn't know that I'm searching for, tax strategies or crypto, whatever, right? Now those worlds converge, and that is a whole different thing.
Defense attorney and offshore accounts and hiding money took off, like they exploded in the DC area. The government knows a lot more than most, I think, Americans realize. The data center that Google runs and figures out all the things that you're searching, all of those things have backdoors for the government to plug into. So, we can have this sort of illusion of privacy and so forth, but it truly is an illusion. The issue is when they start acting upon it. And you have no idea of when that's taking place. And how it's taking place and how your situation in the world or whatever might be compromised as a result. So I think there's a lot to worry about there, and I don't see any breaks on that process anytime soon either. In fact, I find that it's sort of accelerating.
So what's your gut? Not to put you on the spot, but what's your gut? Is this so? If you think about back to the Elon thing, part of me is like, well, there may be some commercial benefit. Like you actually brought up a great point around X doing well now, right? There could be some commercial benefit to the stuff that he's doing. And the Tesla promo that him and Trump did last week. So maybe there's some commercial benefit, but I would say right now, at least, we'll see what happens, year out. But right now, I don't think it's actually benefiting Elon from a business standpoint. So I kind of like when people are doing things that as much as I'm a capitalist, that don't benefit them financially, because then it's like, well, maybe they're doing it for the right reasons. Maybe they're doing it just because it's the right thing to do. People are like burning Teslas and stuff. Doge's approval ratings, according to some research, is like 40%. So and Tesla is been at an all-time low, even lower than its peers, with the the market being down. So so far, at least, it doesn't seem like this is a good business decision for Elon.
Which goes back to his Asperger's autism thing. Right or wrong, he believes he's doing the right thing, and he believes that it's worth this sort of harm to his brand and harm to his companies and harm to his wealth to do it. So, kudos to him for being that dedicated to it. Is it a smart business decision? I think clearly not. But I don't think that's what's motivating him. Having read his biography and so forth, he's never really been motivated by money, interestingly enough, as the richest man in the world. And that's true of a lot of these sorts of sort of extremist billionaires over the years. Go back to like Howard Hughes, or even Henry Ford was pretty much an extremist as well. I think that might be somewhat characteristic of people that have this sort of impact on the world. They got to be a little bit crazy, right? And then the burning of the Teslas and so forth. I always go back to a truism of the internet and a truism of human nature, and that is extremists are the ones that grab the headlines and so forth. The American Revolutionary War was only fought by 5% of the total population of the colonies back then. The other 95% were along for the ride. And so, 3 or 4 psychos out there like keying or burning Teslas grab the headlines, and it makes it seem like it's a huge problem across the country. It may only be 3 or 4 or 10 people. And those are 3 or 4 or 10 of the most influenceable people through social media. You send them a couple of crazy tweets telling them this is the right thing to do, and they're going to go out and do it.
Yeah.
I did a lot of those studies on human behavior being driven by social media 10 years ago. And the point of a Facebook or whatever is to identify those people who are most influenceable, and then to influence them to do things that make it look like the entire society is heading in a certain direction. A lot of it's an illusion, but it makes for good news, and it makes for good eyeballs.
Yeah. Great conversation, Chris, as always, and we'll keep watching this. Look for our updates on this topic and related topics. I think we're going to talk about tariffs next week, Chris. So I'll try to be prepared for you again next week. But thanks for joining us, everybody. We're offering a free data risk assessment for anybody who is in the compliance regulatory world, or just wants to kind of get an AI readiness check. IRPAai.com/risk assessment. It's a free assessment for qualified members. And in the meantime, if there's anything else that you're working on and you want some help with, if you're on the buy side, we have a team of analysts like Chris and others who can help point you in the right direction on what you're working on. If you're on the vendor side and you want to brief us on what you're doing, what your capabilities are, just go to IRPAai.com/analysts. Chris, have a great week. Have a great week, everybody.
Parting shot on the data risk assessment.
Yeah.
If any of you are watching, I strongly urge you to do this. I mean, it will blow your mind what the tools that we're working with will show you very quickly, and not only kind of expose the level of risk that's out there, but also help you do something about it. So I urge anyone that's listening to take us up on the offer for the analysis there. It's very eye-opening and very valuable.
And you get to talk to Chris. So who would want to do that? Have a great week, everybody.
Take care.